So we have a panel of really excellent and experienced speakers, and I'm pleased to introduce them all to you. And they will bring a wealth of knowledge and experience around working with and involving fathers. Your speakers today will be Adrian Burgess, the Joint CEO and Head of Research at the Fatherhood Institute. Adrian will be followed by Dr. Abigail Millings, who is the Associate Professor at the Centre for Behavioural Science and Applied Psychology at Sheffield Hallam University. It will be Fiona who's speaking before Abigail, and she is the Operations Manager at Durham County Council. And finally, we'll have Owen Thomas, who is the Managing Director and Head of Programmes at Future Men. There'll be time at the end of the session for questions and answers. So please do pop any questions or reflections in the chat as we go through, bearing in mind that everyone in the room will be able to see them. And now I'm going to hand over to Adrian Burgess to start her presentation. Yes, please do go ahead. Thank you, Adrian.
Yes, okay. Sorry. Okay, right, including fathers in family hubs. Yes, the importance of this has been flagged up, and that's absolutely brilliant. It's one of those things that really I think everyone engaging in family hubs should think about, because there's an exciting opportunity here to mainstream in father inclusion in family hubs to make these services mature, as it's called, in their engagement with fathers. So let's start off. So I'm going to talk about 4 things in my 12 minutes. Briefly, the Fatherhood Institute, here who we are, what we do. I want to just choose a few examples of why fathers matter, because I think it's very important that the service providers really need to get their heads around the fact that these fathers are having an impact. The impact can be terrible, the impact can be awful, and it can be positive. So, but they matter, and they matter because they have an impact. They also have a matter because they're almost all families, so we can't think, oh, they're only there in most of our families are single parent families, he's not around, because that's not true. And then I want to look at barriers to engaging with fathers, not in the fathers, barriers in the services. And then I want to just introduce you to mainstreaming for father support in family hubs. You'll see here at the bottom here we have a link. It's on every slide, it's at the end as well, and I know you're going to get that. You might want to take a photograph of it on the slide if you want, which is where there's lots more information on. So the Fatherhood Institute, 3 strands of work: research. We're very big on research. We do a lot of research summaries to gather the evidence base for engaging with dads. I think that's just the most important thing, to know that whatever we're suggesting comes from a good evidence base. It's not some fantasy that we're drawing on. Secondly, policy. So we look with policymakers and we try to influence NICE guidelines, for example, to make sure they're father inclusive. And then there's practice. There's the work we do, training up managers and face-to-face workers in how to feel confident in engaging with dads. Now, on the evidence side, on the impact side in this report, I'm just going to really draw some of the data from 2 of our big reports, which are Nuffield Foundation funded and are absolutely full of evidence. One is antenatal, that's Who's the Bloke in the Room, and the second one just recently published, Bringing Baby Home, that's the first year after the birth. So why fathers matter? Right, because of their impact on children and mothers. And I'm going to talk about it in the prenatal period, because you might think that, well, that they haven't met the baby's not even born. How are these fathers having an impact? And what does that impact consist of? So what's so amazing is that if you look at fathers' prenatal depression, for example, and it's not the only thing. I mean, socioeconomic status, all kinds of other things have impact longitudinally. If you look at just the prenatal depression, and then you take account of, in your longitudinal study, you make sure you rule out mother's depression and father's continuing depression, just prenatal depression on its own is related to more emotional and conduct and other problems in their children. The second one is attention deficits in the children. It's also, this is the prenatal depression. Then we've got behavioral problems, psychiatric problems, right through to age 7. So that's the prenatal stuff. So how on earth does this work when the fathers haven't even met the infants? Well, the couples argue more when the father's depressed. The conflict between the parents and the father's depression can impact on mothers, and expectant mothers' stress, anxiety, and depression can have long-term effects on the child, possibly through fetal programming. So what's happening is that the environment around the mother, which is very substantially defined by her partner, crucial even at that stage. And another point, that one wrong, is that the fathers might be, if the father's depressed, employment, he may be unemployed, other sort of rubbish things can happen to the family, which impact on the mother, and through that also on the infant. So prenatal depression and other factors, crucial. The father's behavior in the first few weeks also has long-term consequences. So we're not waiting, to fathers to get engaged with toddlers. We're talking about this. When the father's early caregiving or play, and we're talking in the first 6 to 12 weeks, we're talking really early. When the father's early caregiving or play was frequent, was regular, was positive in tone and active, their 2-year-olds show better cognitive development, they're doing better brain-wise, and they display fewer behavior problems. So we need to get at the father's early caregiving on play right from the beginning. Conversely, toddler problems are greater in these 2-year-olds when their father in the first few weeks was disengaged or remote, and so on, in face-to-face interaction. So this is really crucial stuff. Father's early depression in the first few weeks also has long-term consequences. I'm not going to go through all of them. They're on the slides. You'll see them when you get your copy of the slide. But it lasts through, I just want to look at the last one. Father's early depression postnatally can be seen, the impact can be seen right through to secondary school age children. This is really shocking, I think, to know that that's the case. So also there's the parents themselves. We looked at in the antenatal period how the father's depression could impact on the mother. And after the birth, what we're seeing is where the mothers who feel criticized by the father express more negativity towards their baby. So it actually impacts negatively on the mother-infant relationship. Babies tend to be more settled when the father feels positive about his relationship with their mother. So the couple relationship is really crucial here. And I think it's lovely that when the father feels positive, the babies tend to be more settled. So, we all know what those first few weeks, months are like, years, first couple of years at least. And to think that you might be helping a baby to sleep better when the father feels positive and you can help him feel positive, I think that's amazing. The other thing to recognize that 80% of new mothers identify their baby's father as their primary source of support. Doesn't mean that the other 20% don't see him as a source of support. They do generally, but 80% sees the primary. It's not her mum, it's not a friend, it's the father. Okay, so why fathers matter present? I want to get our heads around this. There's a common belief that there are loads and loads of single mums at the time of the birth, and the research does not bear that out. And research over 20 years has shown this. This is not something just happened yesterday. Birth registration, only 5% of mothers say they're not in a relationship with the baby's father at the time of the birth. 5%, right? 1 in 20. However, even among these fathers, 20%, 1 in 10 of the fathers that attends the birth, so many enters their name on the birth certificate. And I can't see this properly because there's something, I need to get rid of this. Yeah, sorry, it was covering my slide. Among these couples, 1 in 10 fathers attends the birth, 1 in 4 enters his name on the birth certificate, and 1 in 4 is still in touch with the infant and mother 9 months later. So that's what, among the 5% of mothers who say they're not in a relationship. So let's look again. Let's look at the next one. I can't get this to 95% of parents, 95%, the mother says, I am in a relationship with the baby's father, right? Given that only 5% then are not. And as further backup to this information, 95% of parents jointly register their baby's birth. That means one of them goes in with the marriage certificate if they're married, and if they're not married, both are going to have 95%. And 95% say they're in a couple relationship. I want to talk about the ones who would not register on the birth certificate, because they're interesting too. That's 5%, right? At infant age 10 months, around a third of the fathers who were not registered on the birth certificate were a non-cohabiting partner of the birth mother. That tends to mean that they stayed over part of the time. Okay, so let's think, someone said to me, oh, you're right, that might be when they're born, but then they're all splitting up straight after, aren't they? No, where parents had been living separately at the time of the birth, which is 15%, 25% of those have moved in together by the time the baby's 9 months old. And where parents had been living together at the time of the birth, only 5.5% had separated by the time the child was aged 3. So there's very stability in these couple of relationships early on. Very few fathers go completely AWOL where the parents are not, have actually separated. So among the 5%, 5.5% of couples who had separated by child age 3, over 90% of the fathers were still seeing their young child regularly. And this one, which is, but this is a big children's centre service, they're very disadvantaged families in England with the child 18 months. Only 4% of the fathers in this entire cohort of 5,717 families, only 4% were not seeing them. These fathers are there, and if you're not engaging with them, it's because you've missed them. So I want to say a little bit about the lockdown effect, which has had a tremendous impact on fathers' engagement with their infants, with their children going forward since the lockdown. You know, it's been a huge shift. So fathers now spend 2/3 of the time, working fathers now spend 2/3, that's 65% of the time that working mothers spend on childcare. And that's up from 54% before the pandemic. So it's up to about 40 minutes for every hour a mother spends, when it used to be just over 30 minutes. So that's one of the lockdown effects. Working fathers now spend 2/3 of the time that working mothers spend on household work. And again, the similar lift. Working mothers are now, however, are now spending slightly less time than before the pandemic on housework and childcare, only 3%. It's a very small adjustment. It's not here on this slide, but they're now spending far more time on paid work. They're spending 75% of the time that working fathers spend on paid work, which is up from 2/3 pre-pandemic. So you've got these working mothers very often in your cohort, and you've also got these fathers already doing a lot more than they were, as well as being present in most families. So what are some of the barriers?
Sorry, Adrian, I was giving you a 1-minute warning, and
that's fine. A 1-minute warning, is that right? Yeah. So some of the barriers, and again, you can look at these. The main thing is that fathers are not explicitly invited to meet with the service provider. If you just send a letter that says, dear parents, they don't feel invited. Fathers' details are not recorded and updated systematically. The term parent is used, and you wipe out the term father and mother. You just say parent because you think we're going to offend people. And if the service runs a fathers group, this is these can be great, but this is a big risk, because it can be that everyone just sends the dad to the father's group and ignores him otherwise. So there's a few more barriers there. I'm not going to go through them. And then I just want to let you know, again, looking at at the link at the top of this, that this free webinar, Mainstreaming Fathers in Family Hubs, which will give you a whole lot more information, and another one involving fathers in the home learning environment. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the session.
Thank you very much. Morning everyone, thank you for inviting me along to this conference. Really excited to be here. I'm here to speak around Durham's Father Inclusive strategy in our journey so far. Next slide, please. So where it began. So as part of Durham's Reducing Parental Conflict programme, we commissioned a community engagement project which had 451 responses from Durham parents. However, only 19 of those, which equates to 4%, were actually from dads. So this was the wake-up call we needed to reflect on how effective we really are at engaging dads and male carers in our family support work. We also spoke to staff and asked them to honestly reflect on their caseloads and think about what percentage of assessments they genuinely had dad's voice. And it was pleasing that this was quite high. However, when we asked them to think about what percentage of their caseload they had continued genuine engagement with dads throughout the family support work, this percentage plummeted. So we brought together a small number of dads from Durham, there's approximately 5 in our initial focus group, that have been working with us, and we obtained their views on fatherhood, but also of inclusive practice, and it's been really enlightening. Next slide, please. So why is it important? As Adrian's alluded to, it's only recently that there's been significant research undertaken into the role of dads in child development, and that is on dads who remain part of the family unit. However, a number of studies have demonstrated that the role of the father is crucial in reducing the negative behaviour, aggression and conflict that occurs during adolescence. Seemingly, it is dads who are primarily responsible for the development of emotional regulation in their teenage children. And further, dads who positively engage with their children encourage improved psychological regulation, social maturity and life skills. There is, however, a good deal of research into the impact of absent fathers, which is equally important for our understanding of how children who grow up in fatherless households are affected. So, for example, children growing up in these circumstances are statistically at higher risk of criminality, substance misuse and gang membership. They are also more likely to be violent and aggressive, and they are twice as likely to have poor mental health in adolescence, suffer lower self-esteem and become sexually active earlier. Girls growing up in households where dad is absent are more likely to start puberty earlier and form significant relationships sooner than their peers. Where there is a dad available somewhere, we need to try and engage them where it is safe to do so. It's absolutely recognised that there are situations whereby dads are not available. They may be deceased or we may have same-sex couples, but it is important to remember that is the voluntary absent or excluded dad that is associated with potential negative outcomes. There is also a legal duty and right. So as Adrian said, any parent named on the birth certificate of a child after 2003 is deemed to have parental responsibility. And this means they're expected to provide for the child, including financially, and protect them. They are also responsible for disciplining the child and should be consulted regarding any important decisions. So that includes medical treatment, educational provision, change of name, for example. And if the parents are separated, all of the above still applies, although it does not include an automatic right for the father to see the child. And since 2007, local authorities have also been required to demonstrate gender equality in the provision of services. So this means we must deliver our services to families in a way which does not discriminate against or exclude either gender. Next slide, please. So I love this image and I think it is really powerful. And unfortunately, this is how society often perceive the roles of mums and dads. And we do have a lower expectation of dads, and this needs to change. Also, we've heard from research, dads tell us that we assess them as mums and therefore bad mums. So we must recognise that the roles of mums and dads will be different, but are of equal importance. Next slide, please. So this is just a quote, but that fathers are often labelled hard to reach, with primary responsibility for low engagement laid at their door. And again, this needs to change. We have an active responsibility to engage fathers and make our services as inclusive as possible. Next slide, please. So understanding the barriers. We know there are many reasons as to why professionals may not intentionally or unintentionally be proactive and persistent in engaging dads. And this is by no means an exhaustive list. There are a variety of reasons, for example, why mum might not want dad involved, and not just because of domestic abuse. Parental conflict, separation disagreements, or different views about parenting could all be factors in this. This can be particularly challenging for consent-based services who may have concerns of disengagement if the subject of dad being involved is challenged. Are we asking the right questions and explaining the benefits? Do we have all the facts, or are we unintentionally being collusive with mum? Are we aware of any professional biases that we may hold? Is this different for separated parents? Do we speak to mum and then ask her to ask dad to call us? Do we compromise, collude with mum, what she says we can and can't share? And are we clear with our understanding of parental responsibility in order that we can support dads and mums in knowing their own responsibility? A new partner. So mum has a new partner and does not want to rock the boat, or dad may have a new partner and mum might feel threatened by another woman being involved in the children's lives. There's also professional bias. Are dads equal to mums, or are they treated as secondary parents? Who do services most often contact first, mum or dad? Why is this? Is there professional, personal or cultural bias at play? What do we as workers tolerate? We might not agree due to cultural, gender, religious differences or family uniqueness, but we must know the legal and illegal thresholds. We need to also think about service design and flexibility. Are we asking dads to access services that have been designed with women in mind? Are the tools and resources that we use engaging and meaningful to dads? And are we actively seeking both mum and dad's consent and views, or are we just satisfied with only mum's? Are we arranging appointments at times and venues that allow dads to be involved? Are we adapting our support and interventions to include physical or virtual appointments where possible? And is our practice mum-centric? Do we consider and adapt our practice and engage dads and males? There are also a number of practitioner worries, including past violence and domestic abuse, and the potential worry practitioners may have, in including dad, about possible repercussions for mum and children. Practitioners worry about putting mum off to agreeing to support if we are trying to engage dad, particularly when parents are separated. And also the pressure on workers to complete, for example, assessments within timescales if they do need to meet with parents separately. Next slide, please. So, for all the reasons we have said earlier as to why it's important to engage dads, we need to provide workforce development programmes and educate practitioners in why we must engage dads and male carers. Have them see dad as an asset and be routinely include him as part of the family support network. We need to sell the benefits involving dads to those reluctant mums so that they can see dads as an asset too. We need to review our service design and delivery. We need to try and affect cultural change, starting antenatally through our skills educational curriculum, challenge gender stereotypes, be more proactive in having a more gender balanced workforce, and work with employers so that they understand the importance of flexible working for dads and how they should be able, without consequence, to attend events and important milestones for their children. We also need to look how we market and communicate our services. And Abigail from Sheffield Hallam University will be telling us shortly about how we're doing this in Durham as part of some DFE behavioural insights research. Next slide, please. So Durham's strategy. So we're at the beginning of our journey, which requires long-term practice and cultural change. And so far, what we have done is we've raised awareness at strategic management and partnership meetings of what Durham dads have told us and what research is telling us. This has really helped provoke thinking with partners who have committed to a pledge, which could be as simple as ensuring they collect dad's contact details, for example, contact dads first, or have male dad carers as standard gender item team meetings. We are piloting with a cluster of schools and wanting to have dads more included in school life. In schools are hosting events such as a bacon and butty and footy days, and addressing letters to both parents or simply contacting dad first. We are also reviewing how we recruit in taking positive action by having a statement on job adverts simply stating we welcome male applicants, and we are targeting where we advertise jobs. We're also including the importance of engaging dads and male carers in our interview questions. We're using an auditing tool in early help and our youth justice teams to begin with to rate how inclusive our practice is and our services, and we will review this 6 monthly and have improvement actions included in our service and team plans. We have our first dads reference group meeting in September, and they will be walking around our family centres and looking at the external grounds and internally at the decor and how welcoming it is for dads. They will also be thinking about how they are welcomed into our centres, a bit like a secret shopper, and this will really help in the development of our family hubs. We're also hoping that our children's social care service colleagues will get off this. Next slide, please.
Warner might be expert. Okay.
Great, thank you. We have a dads project group established with a mission statement, a project plan, and have identified dads champions for each of our early help and youth justice teams who have completed 3 days of training. The images on the screen there show our early help newsletters, which we have quarterly, and we always have a dads article relating to the audience. So for example, our newsletter for schools, we shared some research on how dads helped to improve literacy. We have more awareness raising through our safeguarding week, through our family hub developments, through children and people services events, and also we've involved dads in the co-production of our new children and people strategy called Growing Up in County Durham. And we're also making sure that dads and male care reviews input in our recent health needs assessments. We're changing the narrative, and practitioners are informing mums that as part of our work, we will be contacting dad rather than asking them if we can. And we plan to broaden our workforce development plan across the partnership in the new year, but we want to get our own house in order first, so to speak. We've also started to work with managers and now have dads and male carers as a real focus in our case supervisions and in our audits. That brings me to the end of my presentation. It's just kind of a sneak peek into what we are doing in Durham. It's a long-term journey and it requires us all to get on board, from strategic managers, from partnerships, from local communities. And it's something which we're really committed and excited to be part of. So I'd love to come again to speak to you and hear all about what your services and local authorities are doing for more further inclusive practice. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiona. That was so interesting and perfect timing as well. Thank you so much for your insights.
The wonders of Zoom. Thanks so much for inviting me along. I'd just like to congratulate my previous colleagues who were speaking, who all made great points. It's so heartening for me as someone who's from a charity who are focused on service delivery, working with fathers and men at different stages of their lives, to hear kind of like the culmination of many, many years of research and practice really being honed into how, you know, practice examples from Durham, research from Adrian and the Fatherhood Institute, and the dedicated research that's going on alongside the practice up in Durham. So brief presentation that should highlight some of our experiences and our work. Okay, so as was highlighted, I work for a charity called Future Men. I am now the Managing Director and Head of Programs for our father services. We were previously a charity called Working with Men, and we just changed our name and rebranded just before the pandemic in 2019 to have a more aspirational field to kind of reposition ourselves to be more successful as a charity third sector organisation. Our vision and mission is a better future for every boy, every man and everyone, and we want to inspire men to become more dynamic future men, basically. This can already at the outset be a challenging message because people think you're a gendered or sex-based charity that works specifically around boys and men. You're going to be in an adversarial relationship with those who work with women and girls, and that is completely opposite to our mission and why we're here. You know, our belief is that if we support boys and men, particularly those from marginalised backgrounds or have more challenging starts to life, we're going to bring about a fairer society for all. You know, there are some quite restrictive models of masculinity that have been given to men from various backgrounds that are restrictive not only to them and are not only harmful to those around them, but also lead to men having quite unfulfilling and unsatisfactory and unhappy lives, basically. So we want to intervene as soon as possible to try and change that. We do this by focusing our work around 7 key characteristics. Seven key characteristics that run through all of our work. These were drawn out by some evaluation that was done across all of our project areas. We don't just work with fathers. We work with boys in schools, starting around points of vulnerability or teachable moments in their lives when men are more, and boys are more open and prone and able to ask for support. So that starts for us at primary school age, particularly in the lead up to the transition from primary to secondary school, where research shows, and we know this is a vulnerable time for boys. Boys tend to do really well at primary school from all backgrounds, particularly those from ethnic minority backgrounds, but something happens with this transition to secondary school with expectations of the transition into adulthood and what it is to be a man, as well as for those from particular communities where there may be a socioeconomic or other cultural factors where there is a pressure to fit traditional models of being a breadwinner, an earner of money, and to be strong and to not be seen as weak. So we look at these 7 characteristics that are not exclusive to masculinity or to men, they're human characteristics, but we found time and time again in our work across the life course of men and boys that we come back to these particular areas. I won't labour the point too much, but you can see that kind of really important to us is to try and grow empathy, to promote to men and boys that they should use other methods than violence to solve their problems, that they should be reflective, and they should try to be inclusive of all other people. Empathy is a really big part of that, not sympathy. It's something different. Empathy is actually trying to understand what it's like from someone else's perspective rather than just go, trying to put yourself into the shoes of someone who's different than you or has a different experience than you is really important and powerful for men and boys in our experience. Curiosity in terms of aspiration setting as well, and not settling for the lot that you've been given in life, particularly for fathers, is really, really important, trying to explore different models of what your family or people like you from areas that you come from can do and not being kind of held back by glass ceilings above them. And resourcefulness, kind of being able to make the best of what you have. And that's not to be confused with settling for what you've got, but actually being realistic in what you can do, and finally resilience, which we hear a lot of. And I'm sure any of my colleagues or attendees today who work in this sector, resilience is kind of a key word at the moment and has been for a number of years. But we're really keen in terms of a social justice point of view. Again, it means what it said there, you're able to recover when things go wrong, rather than you just continue to put up with really poor outcomes or unfair situations or circumstances. You know, what we want to create is a critical thinking. We want men and boys to be more aware of their surroundings and have more agency over their lives, rather than feel as though things are being done to them, that they can actually make a positive difference in their lives. So there's a question there. When you hear the word father, what thought comes to mind? I don't expect you to add a comment in this particular chat. It's something from a previous thing, but just in your own mind, you know, and it helps frame the discussions we've already had. Fathers, in our experience, are still legally considered secondary parents in most cases in families. That's how the law defines it. That's how benefits and services from central and local government are allocated. Although there are lots of guidance and good practice that has been quoted already in the presentations before, that still is the case legally. We work differently to many statutory services, but we do work alongside. We raise money from charitable trusts, from central and local government pots to do particular different pieces of work. And I joined the charity as a young father's development worker, working with teenage parents way back in the mid-2000s under the old teenage pregnancy strand under a Labour government. And that fits to our piece of work where I say we work with marginalised boys and men at key moments in their lives. But what we do is we work with those particularly from lack backgrounds, young men who are poor and have multiple points of overlapping poorer outcomes. You know, we recognise that fathers on a whole have low engagement with traditional services, but we, as was pointed out in the presentation, really believe that if you engage fathers as early as possible, and we do this with a programme called Future Dads, which is an antenatal programme, a men's antenatal programme, the more likely, so it shows more likely men are to be positively engaged in the life of their children. That is key to reducing intergenerational inequalities, both culturally, genderly, and racially. You know, what our experience shows us and research shows us that many fathers that we work with, particularly younger dads, have been subject to care proceedings or known to statutory service throughout their life as children. That continues. They may have experienced violence or sexual abuse at home as children. And few of the dads we work with have had consistent models of good fathering. What we really want to do is break that cycle. And this is with marginalised dads. And there's a caveat to that. What I would say is, though, over the years that I've delivered this work, 15 to 20 years now of working with fathers, and I was a young dad myself way back when. It's really, really important that we don't kind of silo dads who have got more complex needs totally away from the more universal offer for dads that early help might have in place, because dads' lives are a continuum where sometimes things are not going well and never did, and other times things are going okay, just like mums. And I think it's really important that we're able to follow dads on their journey through their life course and through their children's life course, particularly when thinking about family hubs, where we want to work with families from 0 right to 18 or 19, that we're available to them and have offers for them, depending on what their particular circumstances are at that time. And it should be seamless, and it should be one front door, and they shouldn't kind of feel as though they have to keep retelling their story every time they turn up. What we also do, I'm just going to close the admit person to the room so I can see, is directly what we do is prepare and support fathers and young men for fatherhood. We want to help them develop their parenting skills and techniques. We do this through one-to-one contacts and case holding work, trauma-informed approaches, and person and child-centered approaches, depending on what works for that individual. What I would want to say is that the cohort of fathers are as diverse as any other group within society. There is massive intersectionality, and men from one particular racial group will have loads of different intersecting experiences in their lives that might mean that they're particularly traditional, particularly religious, or particularly forward-thinking and modern in their views. And I think there are generalizations, but I tend to want to move away from stereotypes with any groups and respect individual circumstances as they're presented to us. What we deliver as well in group settings are direct interventions around parenting, whether that be Triple P, Incredible Years, our preferred model that we work with the Race Equality Foundation to deliver strengthening families. In our experience, that particularly those from racially diverse backgrounds, really respect is an American program that was developed in Chicago back in the 90s. Has been modernized by the Race Equality Foundation and really kind of reflects positive things that you want to bring forward from your childhood into parenting your children, but also highlights things that should be left in the past and that are no longer relevant, bringing up children in the 21st century, whether that be harsh physical discipline of your children, particular views about women and men's role. Many people we work with are first, second, or third generation immigrants to this country, basically, and sometimes have very particular views on how families should function and work, but also have come to this country for a reason. So it's really good to actually have positive relationships with them, trusting relationships with them, where we can start to put in place high challenge on some of these views that may be negative or be getting in the way of them being positive parents. We do this work ourselves by building relationships and community capital in the areas that we work. We work mainly around the London area, various different London boroughs, depending on where we get our funding to work, what our relationships are with those individual local authorities. We do this through intensive outreach engagement. We have workers who are skilled, representative of the communities they work with, not always men. We've had some brilliant female fathers workers, but they are very sympathetic to the needs of fathers and very skilled and aware of how fathers can positively influence the lives of their children. And we do, a bit like was highlighted in the last couple of presentations, is promote positive images of fathers from a range of backgrounds doing great work with their children, whether that be changing nappies, carrying children around, whether that be turning up at parents' evenings, and doing the same parenting roles that mums do, basically. I think, one young dad I worked with, to be frank, using his language as a young man from East London, said, look, the only thing I can't do as a father is breastfeed because I haven't got the right equipment. Everything else I'm able to do, and it shows as well, we share this with younger dads as well, that actually, in terms of child attachment and bonding, what children require is love, shelter, warmth, and their basic needs. And men and women can provide that. So I think that helps dispel some of the myths and that uncertainty that our previous speaker spoke about with dads. And if they trust you and they trust the voice that you're bringing to them, that really has a lot of power. How do we do this work? Sorry, I'm just trying to move the slide on. I've just got to remove this admit new person. unfreeze my screen. I hope, there you go. So as I said, we really promote the awareness of attachment and child development. We explore its relevance to fathers. You know, dads we did lots of surveys with dads at school gates in areas where we've been trying to set up projects. For dads, typically a lot of them, the first answer they'll come up with is that what's really important to be disciplined. You know, my job is to make sure my children are prepared to get the most out of schooling. And that doesn't necessarily mean, when we explore that further, that my job is to tell them off and to smack them. It's to help them to be ordered so that when they go to school, they don't waste their time getting into trouble. They're focused on their learning, because it's a means out of poverty. It's a means to make a better future for the next generation. And the messaging they've been given. When we run our Future Dads course, which is the antenatal course I spoke about before, which we do in partnership with hospitals and sometimes in children's and community settings as well. One of the key activities we do there is something called Diamond Dads, where we ask dads to kind of prioritize different characteristics and skill sets they think are important to being a dad, and then as a group talk about those after some interventions videos we show them. And very early they put all of the traditional things like breadwinner, disciplinarian, supportive at the top. But actually, after we've had our sessions and we revisit that activity later in the day, they soften in their approach and they put much more kind of what would be traditional characteristics associated with mothering, or people would say some dads, in terms of reflecting what was said in the previous conversation, would not associate with being the father or masculine qualities, like what people would say, you're very in touch with your feminine or maternal side. But actually, dads would say, no, this isn't being a dad. I want to be loving, I want to be nurturing, I want to be caring. Why are those qualities only associated with mum? So I think it's really liberating for a lot of the guys we work with, the approach we have, but it's really difficult to do with some of the guys. It's not a short process of messaging or just flyers. It's actually about human relationships and contact and having ongoing sessions, regular interventions with dads. We do this work not individually. We have to do this in partnership with other services, particularly statutory services and other voluntary services in boroughs that are already set up and existing. We want to be parts of multi-agency teams, and we do so particularly with dads with higher needs. In South London, we're doing programs around domestic abuse and domestic violence, where we're delivering caring dads. We're doing this alongside women's orgs who provide support for survivors of domestic abuse, to make sure that actually we're providing services that families want. Often families present as wanting to stay together, they present as wanting to be dads involved, even after incidents of abuse or where relationships become dysfunctional. And they recognise that maybe they should separate, but co-parenting is still an important thing for both parents. How do we support parents, both the fathers and the mothers, to do this safely? And how do we kind of support professionals as well to overcome some of their own ideas and assumptions about men, particularly where there are concerns about safety, to make sure that we can offer this rather than just sideline men and treat them as a deficit, and actually use them as assets to support their children's ongoing development. You know, our reality, to make that real, is that we work with dads that we go out into the community and find the work for us. We know children are subject to CP and CIM, and whilst all of the professionals go with what mum and dad's saying, which is that he hasn't seen the family for the last few weeks, he's not allowed to go around the house. When we meet with dad, he often says to me, yeah, I stayed there 3 nights last week. We've got on and off relationship, but we don't tell the social workers that. You know, and part of our job is to really try and change that dynamic, get them to be honest with other professionals and realise that actually try and get professionals as well to not be too harsh with families where proper risk assessments are put in place, to actually have a whole family approach, if we can, where it's safe. Why do we do it? I won't dwell on this. I think Adrienne spoke really well. There has been lots of research for the last 15 or 20 years around dads. And whilst it's great to continue research and make it relevant, you know, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. There is massive guidance about how services can and should, and why they should engage with others, as you can see there. You know, I don't want to repeat them again. Our experience has told us that dads sometimes, as was said before, find it difficult to engage with services because they don't know who's there to support them. They feel as though they're set up for women. Even if services are labelled as parent services, because of our history in this country of services, that basically means they're for mums. The workforce in these services is overwhelmingly female, and we need to do much more, as was said by Fiona, to specifically and directly target more male staff in education, in schools, and in early years. I know in London, LEAF, LEYF are doing great work trying to pioneer apprenticeships for male workers in the early years to support families and do childcare. This is really, really important. It was one of my kind of parts into doing this work and then coming into working with parents. You know, What we want to do, as I said before, is help men to be more prepared for parenthood, starting as early as possible before their babies are born, working with midwives, hospitals, early help, health visitors, making sure that they feel confident to talk to men, making sure that dads feel as though they're supported and want to be, and welcome within those services. We've worked with a national organisation called Best Beginnings to help them update, alongside the Fatherhood Institute, to update their baby buddy app to ensure that there's a pathway specifically for fathers within that, so they feel as though they're getting the right message at the right time, but in the tone and the voice that speaks to them, and don't always feel as though I'm just here as a secondary support to my wife, which is also a really important thing to do, or to my partner, which is also a really important role to play. But if we want to address men's well-being and mental health, we have to see them as individuals as well with this pathway, which will help liberate mums. If we want better, if we want women to succeed in the workplace and not feel as though their career prospects are challenged, we need to make them feel as though that their partners can step up in the parenting sphere, and they can trust that their partners won't suffer a financial downfall, as women do at the moment, for taking time away. Both parents, as they're leading, as they want, as young parents are telling us, want to play more equal roles within the parenting space. We have to also address the reality, though, that many men, when there is relationship breakdown or conflict, have difficulty gaining access to their children. Often this can be characterized because of their harmful or aggressive behavior, but sometimes it's not because of that. Sometimes it's just because of parents, people in a relationship not getting on anymore, different views about how they should raise their children, familial things, and they don't know how best they can support their children when they're not residing with them and not in a relationship. And I think it's really important that shouldn't be a barrier to us as services engaging with men. If these issues are unaddressed, we know, as was highlighted earlier, we're going to get the fathers themselves will have poorer outcomes. It will lead to more dysfunction, more conflict, and less supported kids, which affects their educational outcomes and their own social and development for years to come. And we see that.
Sorry,
yes.
I'm just going to give you just a pause there, because we have some time to. We've got some good questions lined up by the audience, but really positive comments about your presentation, and totally agree with what you're saying.
Okay, I can leave it there. I'll stop sharing.
Oh, thank you. But yeah, totally preaching to the choir there about men being involved in, and women having support. I just wanted to quickly sum up and say thank you to all of the speakers today. You've been absolutely so amazing and informative. Fiona Adrienne thinking about the myth-busting research was really helpful. Sometimes we start from an incorrect place. Fiona, I was just thinking language is so important, and thinking about those easy wins you talked about there. And Owen, really, I think important points you made there about how it's important not to silo men, it's important to involve them and also think about the kind of the impact on the wider family context. It is absolutely a social justice issue. So thank you so much for that really powerful presentation. I'll go to some of the questions that our audience have asked us, and I'll invite all of the speakers to contribute. So I won't pose the questions to anyone in particular unless it's specifically meant for someone. So there was a question about, is there any research on how dads want services to engage with them, i.e. which means of communication works best with them? Would anyone?
Want me to answer that? Yeah. There's not that I've seen in the UK recently anything particularly good. There has been done in other places. Australia did a very thorough one, and it found, for example, that very few fathers would ever go to a fathers group, whereas the majority of workers thought that fathers would go to a fathers group. So it's important that there should be that, but also it's quite tricky to do, because you don't know. People say they'll do something, but will they really? It is quite tricky. There's no easy win on that. I think what we've done in our training courses is we pull together the best research that we know and help people think about ways. And as Owen says, this is about mainstreaming. It's about getting the father's detail, not using the word parents, using the terms mothers and fathers. And you're fine with lesbian couples. They're happy with that. 2 mothers, and often there is a father involved even in those couples too. So fathers and mothers is not going to put people off. It's a happy terminology. So it's that sort of thing. And we do know quite a lot about what works, and we've over time, over the research, and we have pulled all that together.
Thank you, Adrian. Did anyone want to contribute? Owen?
I only really wanted to swiftly add that whilst there isn't massive research and more needs to be done about what works for dads, and I think research that was presented earlier on around Durham is really great, and if we can grow that in different regions, because obviously there are differences in regions and with different kind of cultural makeup in different areas, different men will want different things. But the reality is this is about changing our culture. Our society has been based on mothers leading on childcare for quite a while now. And if we want to change that and bring about a fairer, more inclusive and diverse society in all of the ways that diversity really means, it doesn't mean race or religion, it means gender roles and what we expect of each other. We have to be in this for the long haul. This has to be a long-term strategy. We're not going to change and get loads of dads in 1 year. We need to do this and have a sustained long-term strategy that the way early years, early help, family services are set up are inclusive of everybody, and particularly both parents. The majority group of parents being mothers and fathers, and make sure as well we've got special stuff for anyone who doesn't identify within those two specific groups as well, so that they feel included. But specifically naming dads and having specific services for them for this transitional period until it becomes the norm is key in our opinion and our experience.
I could add to that, though. I saw there was a question in the chat asking about cultural expectations, since you've mentioned it. And I thought I'd just come in on that. Yes, cultural expectations, of course, have an impact. It's a dynamic effect, between father's behaviour, cultural expectation, it moves backwards and forwards. But I think the key thing to say is that father's behaviour has been changing dramatically since 1975. Every decade, there's higher engagement between fathers and their kids. This is nothing new. And, fathers have over 90% of fathers have been at the birth since 1990. That's 30 years and highly involved. And then, as I say, the boost since lockdown fathers has been remarkable in the data, Office for National Statistics data on fathers' engagement. So I've come to the conclusion, we think that the services are way behind what families are doing. The services are still talking to mothers and parents and talking about single parents. And, we have to look at our terminology here, absent fathers. Most of the fathers where parents do not cohabit, even if they never cohabited from the start or they've separated, are engaged with their children. These are not single mother households. And we shouldn't use the term absent fathers because the foxhole, puts them into this. It's very alienating, of course, because they aren't. Non-resident is also a bit of a problem because lots of these kids stay over with their dad. The dad is resident with the children, though he's not part of the time, though he's not resident with the mother. So, there's different ways. We've looked at a new terminology, which is own household mothers rather than single mothers, and own household fathers. So that we're not, just allow that they're separate, they're parenting from separate households.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We're going to have to leave it there. And I think it was really great that you were able to answer, I think, a few of the questions in one. I would like to say thank you again to all of you who have attended, and a massive thank you to our speakers and to our tech support at the Anna Floyd Centre as well, who have been working behind the scenes to make this event move and work smoothly. Thank you again, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the afternoon and that you've taken away some good information from all of our speakers today.